Hello, Buckeye fans, and welcome to another episode of the Bucknuts Happy Hour. I am Patrick Murphy. We're going to talk some Buckeyes, and we have a lot to talk about this week. We were originally going to do just a reaction show from the Woody Hayes, but we had some things come up, and we figured let's just turn this into a happy hour. So I'm going to be joined by Dave Biddle here shortly, and we're going to talk about what we saw out at Ohio State's 7th practice of fall camp, which we were both in attendance for. It was a big practice, long practice, almost 3 hours. And the Big Ten Network was also there, so there will be coverage of it on BTN. I believe we're recording this on Thursday, August 8th. I believe it will be this evening when you can see the coverage on BTN. But a lot from interviews from the last few days. So we'll try and get to as much of it as we can because this is more of an impromptu show. And we've got a lot of work to do today. I'm just drinking some water. So no beers, no early afternoon beers for me today, sadly. Maybe we'll get to some beers tonight if I can get enough done. But let's bring in Dave. Dave, what's going on? I feel like I just saw you.
Yeah, long time no see, right? Yeah, good to see you again.
I don't
have an adult beverage. I'm rocking the water myself. Very boring.
Yeah. It's fine.
It's a busy day.
You can't drink early every day of the year. So you got to take some breaks sometimes, or else they start telling you have a problem and things like that. And, whatever that means. But let's get into it because we have a lot to talk about. I want to talk about practice. I also want to talk about some of the interviews we've gotten this week. But we'll start with practice. I think the first thing to mention, and it's in our practice report. If you haven't read that, you can read it over on Bucknuts. Dave put it up. I added some observations of my own. We'll start with the offensive line because there seems to be a bit of an illness going around the Buckeye team, specifically on the offensive line. Dave, why don't you brief the fine folks on who was there, who wasn't today?
Yeah, quite the mass unit out there today. So what's interesting is, as you noted, the first one that you saw vomit out at practice was Seth McLaughlin. Out there vomited before practice. We've all seen a lot of football practices over the years and guys vomiting. Usually it's not before practice, it's like during practice after they've been out there, during certain things. And Seth, ironically, stayed out there the entire practice, didn't miss anything. But also before we got there, we were told certain guys wouldn't be there. We were not told who. We got out there. There's no Josh Simmons, the left tackle. There's no Carson Hinsman. There's no George Fitzpatrick. So they're already down 3 guys. Then you got Seth vomiting. Again, that he hardly – I don't know if he even missed a snap other than while he was vomiting. You had Deontay Armstrong leave the field at one point and not come back because of probably a sickness. Same thing with Zen Michalski. Zen Michalski got very sick. So right there, you're down 5 offensive linemen right there, and you're dealing with a defensive line that's pretty much healthy. And so there was a lot of sacks today. Yeah, I mean, the good news is all those guys, hopefully it's a minor stomach bug and they'll all be okay. You wonder if they're going to have to fumigate their team hotel, though, Pat.
Yeah, it is interesting because they did move into the team hotel. So these guys are, I imagine it's 2 guys to a room. Maybe they move them into separate rooms to try and let these guys get healthy if there's enough rooms at the hotel. But it is a bit of an issue. And look, I don't think this is something Buckeye fans need to be worried about, but these offensive linemen are missing some snaps and important ones for some of these guys. I noted during some of the team periods, I'm going to read off what the offensive line looked like from left to right here. You had Austin Siereveld at left tackle, then Josh Padilla, left guard, Seth McLaughlin, Tegra Shabola, and Josh Fryer. That is not the group that we expect to see on August 31st against Akron out on the field. And as you mentioned, the defensive line had the bit of a field day with that, even though there were a couple of defensive linemen who missed out. Tyleik Williams did some work on the side. JT Tuimalau towards the end was working off on the side. Neither looked, you tell me what you think, Dave, but I didn't think either looked injured. It seemed more like they were just being cautious with these 2 players.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, Tyleik was, missed a few more reps than JT. But yeah, I'm with you. I mean, both those guys, it looked like it was very minor, precautious, guys that are, fourth year guys that are well established. No need to take any chances. So yeah, that looked like nothing serious for either Tyleek or for JT.
All right. The next topic we have to hit, I think it's required on every show, is the quarterbacks.
Yep.
You noted in the practice report that Will Howard has, it seems, elevated to taking all of the first team reps, nearly all of the first team reps, especially in their team periods. He was with what more or less was the first team offense. We asked Ryan Day about it afterwards. He was not ready to name a starter. It's worth noting the Buckeyes have their first scrimmage of fall camp on Saturday, which is usually a good indicator of things to come. What did you make of what you saw from Will and what Ryan Day said afterwards?
Yeah, nothing stood out crazy today, good or bad about Will. I thought he was solid. More good than bad, I guess. I didn't see anything that was noticeably bad. I'm just saying there wasn't anything that was like, oh wow, Will Howard's arrived. He looked like he had a solid day. But as you and I talked about, the by far and away the most notable thing to me was, yeah, they were still rotating a little bit, but not only were they not rotating as much with the ones, it's gone from Devin Brown going first in drills and Will rotating in almost evenly to Will going first and Devin not rotating in as much as Will did. So, I mean, will be very surprised if we're not sitting here a week from Monday, so August 19th. I think that might be when Ryan Day announces a quarterback one, because I don't think he wants to wait till game week, which would be the 26th. And I don't think he's in a rush to do it. He's certainly not going to do it. But even I tried to get him today, I knew he wasn't going to. So I think I asked my question decently well. Hey, I'm a rookie reporter. I do what I can. So I knew he wasn't going to ask it today, but or answer it today. But I do think he's going to get a scrimmage in the book at least. So maybe next week. But I think he's going to wait till the 19th when he meets with us after they have 2 scrimmages in the book. Maybe they'll have more than that. And he'll name Will Howard the starter. And be honest, I always like to say, and I didn't come up with this, I see better than I hear. I see better than I hear. So just the biggest thing is seeing Will Howard taking most of the first team reps. But I did hear something very interesting too, as did you, from Ryan Day, saying Will has all the command of the offense, complete command of the offense. Will Howard has complete command of the offense. And that's something I put in our practice report just from my observations. It looked like he's got very good command of the offense prior to us meeting with Ryan Day. So for Ryan Day to say that, to go out of his way to say he has, for the head coach who's a quarterback guy, so you have complete command of the offense. Are you saying that about your backup?
Yeah, probably not. But that's kind of been our expectation all along. It was interesting, just while we're talking quarterbacks. First of all, Will Howard threw the first interception I've seen him throw. It was a good play by Denzel Burke, but noted he did throw an interception. I don't believe he had thrown one yet in fall camp, at least when we've been out there. But, mistakes will happen. I thought he had some really nice throws. In particular, he hit, I think it was Jeremiah Smith. He had some nice throws. We'll leave it at that. Devin Brown had a really good throw down the sideline to Jaden Ballard.
And one to Jelani Thurman, too.
And Jelani Thurman. Will Howard, that was who it was. Jelani Thurman. Will Howard had a touchdown pass. They did a drill. They called it situational, but it was 7-on-7. Basically, they started, roughly the 30-yard line and had about 1:30 to drive down the field. Regular rules, you get out of bounds, the clock stops, you had one timeout, all of that type of stuff. And Will's offense, which was basically the first team offense, was the only one to score. It was a nice pass to Jelani Thurman. Lincoln Keenholz also took part in that. We didn't see Julian Sayin really get involved in team stuff until later in practice. But he did towards the end. Looked like I've thought, the arm talent continues to be impressive. It's just consistency and, some freshman mistakes that, will be ironed out, but you don't need him to be the guy right now. Aaron Nolan did the least of all of them, but that's kind of been the trend throughout fall camp thus far. Is he's clearly the 5th guy and is going to have to work his way up the depth chart in due time. Anyone else outside of quarterback, offensive line that stood out to you, Dave? I have a couple I wanted to mention, but I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I continue to look at Will Linebacker, and I know Jim Knowles said that Sonny Styles and CJ Hicks are neck and neck. That was a couple days ago. Things can change fast in camp. Sonny's still taking – it's a lot like quarterback. It's like both those guys are very talented, and maybe it's not a really good apples to apples comparison. Maybe it's more like apples to oranges. Hey, they're still both fruit. Because I think Sonny Styles and CJ Hicks both have star potential. You might not say that when you're talking about Will Howard and Devin Brown. But my point is, I think either one of those guys could get the job done. But I do find it interesting, Patrick, that throughout spring, it was CJ taking most of the first team reps with Sonny rotating in. Now what do we see through – and it's not a small sample size anymore. 7 practices of camp is a lot, especially now you only get 25 practices in camp. It used to be 29. And some of those practices are game week, which really is not camp anymore. You're just prepping for that first game. Yeah, I know it's Akron still. It's not really camp. So, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. But, I compare that, a lot to the quarterback situation where it's flipped from spring. And it's not a surprise. It's almost like what everybody predicted. It was just took until camp where Sonny is now taking the majority of the reps with the ones at the will. And I still think CJ is going to play a lot. If they do use the 3 linebacker sets that they say they're going to mix in, CJ will be in there. They're obviously going to do that on the goal line like they did today, including when the other team's trying to come out of their own goal line. And at one point they had the young guys in there. They had Arvell Reese at the mic. They had, not young, but CJ Hicks and Sonny Styles, and then Arvell Reese at the mic. And they were looking pretty good in there as they gave, Cody Simon a little rest there. I also like Gabe Powers, but I'm definitely keeping an eye on that Will linebacker spot. And I think it's interesting, again, through the first 7 practices, it looks like that it will be Sonny Styles' job. Does that sound about right to you, Patrick? Does it seem like that'll be Sonny Styles' job that, like, CJ will rotate in?
Yeah, I think so. And we'll get to some of the comments from coaches and players we've talked to this week. But James Laurinaitis, you hear a guy like that, Jim Knowles, talk about CJ Hicks, and it sounds like when you tell CJ Hicks to go do a specific job, especially if it's blitzing, it's run defense, he can go do that really well. It's when he has to make decisions on his own, kind of out of the structure of a defense, where he tends to still struggle a little bit. And I think we've seen some of that, and hopefully he's gotten better in that department, whereas Sonny Styles, obviously playing that nickel position last year, playing some of the deeper safety when Lathan Ransom was hurt, that he can kind of operate on his own, so to speak, without necessarily having instructions. Now, there were some mistakes last year. I don't want to say it was perfect with Sonny Styles. I think the Michigan game and that Blake Corum run come to mind, but it sounds like the adjustment to linebacker is taking for him, which is not a surprise. But you just never know. It's not a video game, as I've said before, and just moving a guy doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be great. I wanted to mention Davison Igbinosun. Well, really Davison Igbinosun and Jeremiah Smith. There was a play right in front of us when they were doing some team stuff where Davison was in really good coverage. I think the ball hit Jeremiah's hand, but he couldn't haul it in. And Davison just lets Jeremiah hear it. And we have heard about the trash talk from this secondary, specifically the cornerbacks. But he was in his face. And to Jeremiah's credit, he just took it. He's a freshman. He just didn't make the catch when he probably thought he should have. But I want to say, 3, 4, 5, I don't know how many plays. Not long after, Jeremiah Smith got Davison Igbinosun back. It was a pass down it was on the other side of the field on the sideline. He makes a nice catch over Davison Igbinosun. I couldn't tell if there was any trash talk back. And then I think it was the next play, Jeremiah got wide open on a move off the line against Igbinosun. Now, Will Howard was going through his progressions and ended up throwing it on the other side of the field, but he was wide open. And so I just wanted to highlight this battle between these wide receivers and this secondary. And I think it's just, as Ryan Day put it, iron sharpening iron. And yeah, maybe the depth of the wide receiver room isn't quite that of the cornerbacks right now, specifically. I mean, we've talked about it. You've got Jermaine Matthews and Calvin Simpson Hunt Aaron Scott and Lorenzo Styles Jr. And, we could list a number of guys that could probably step out on most teams and play, but it was fun to see that battle play out like directly in front of us. And I think it's only going to make these guys better.
It's one of the most fun things about camp is seeing the wide receivers and DBs go at it with some of those balls. And yeah, even though the one that you're talking about right in front of us where Igbinosun was just giving him the business after the play, it wasn't even Jeremiah didn't even do anything that he could. I mean, it would have been impossible. And this is Jeremiah Smith we're talking about that can do the impossible. It would have been impossible for him to make that catch. First of all, I looked, it was probably pass interference. Igbinosun took him out of bounds, and the ball was a little overthrown anyway. But I love Igbinosun. I love how confident he is. Corners, I like my corners to be a little cocky. I mean, he's a lot cocky, but with him and Burke, man, but they back it up, man. I mean, those guys are physical. Igbinosun, if you get a first look at him, you think, is he really going to be a physical corner? He looks a little on the, thin side. He's not thin. He's lean. He's ripped. He's got kind of skinny legs, but he brings it, and I love his attitude. I thought he was really good last year as a sophomore. I think Igbinosun is going to be really good as a junior. Burke has that attitude too. He's going to be fantastic as a senior. And Patrick, I love that Jeremiah Smith carries himself like an NFL wide receiver right now. Not a true freshman, an NFL receiver right now, and one that is mature beyond his years. Like Igbinosun's giving him the business, and Jeremiah kind of just looks at him like, okay, whatever. Like he's the more mature guy. And then what happens? A few plays later, like you mentioned, what happens? It's Jeremiah giving him the business, but not chirping about it. And I don't mind IGB chirping about it. I kind of like that. So just like there was a little skirmish there with the Armstrong brothers and some defensive linemen were getting into it. No punches thrown. But listen, if you're not getting into skirmishes during camp, then I don't know what you're doing. I mean, this is football. Like there better be some skirmishes during camp in football. So really is fun watching those wide receivers and DBs go at it. And you're right. Ryan Day has nailed it. It's a cliche, but it's so true. Iron sharpens iron. And find me two better groups, especially when you combine them. If you rank Ohio State's DBs and Ohio State's wide receivers in 2024 against anybody else in the country, find me a better combination of those two.
Before we talk about some of the comments we've heard this week, since this may be the last time, we might get one more availability during our media window during practice, but maybe not. Is there a unit on this team that has stood out to you that maybe you didn't expect coming into fall camp that it's kind of caught your eye for one reason or another?
Offensive line was a little bit better than I thought, but I was cautiously optimistic. And then today they're a mashed unit. So let's not do recency bias. I mean, I'll take Josh Simmons as an example. Like I see Josh Simmons, and last year it wasn't even like he was bad early in the season or in camp. And then in the first, but he wasn't like that good. And then he just, he looks like a Hulk now. Josh Simmons looks like, we didn't see him today, but he looks fantastic. And again, he's not like he's a 6'8" like left tackle. He's 6'5", but I just mean, you can just see how he's jacked. And, I was watching this offensive line and it kind of hit me like, geez, this is a pretty like veteran, not just veteran as far as, age, but like experience. Like Simmons 26 starts, Donovan Jackson 26 starts at the collegiate level, McLaughlin 25 starts at the collegiate level, Hinsman 12 starts at the collegiate level, Shabola no starts, but that's a great battle at right guard. And then you have Josh Fryer 14 starts at the collegiate level. So it's a sneaky, no one really talks about it. It's kind of a sneaky veteran experienced offensive line. So that's one that stood out to me. And then my biggest question mark on defense was linebacker. I think there's guys people aren't talking about, like Gabe Powers. I don't say nobody's talking about. People are talking about him. Arvell Reese is a guy I think will be mostly special teams this year, but I have a feeling, Patrick, Arvell Reese is going to be a dude here. Like, I don't know if it's going to be this year. 6'4", 238. He's physical. He's fast. He's extremely athletic, and I loved really getting for the first time unless I'm missing something, getting a chance to sit down with Arvell yesterday. Really enjoyed getting to know him, and you can tell he eats, sleeps, and breathes football. So Arvell Reese, I like what I'm seeing with the depth at linebacker with Powers and Reese, and obviously whoever is not that starter at will be a backup, either Sonny Styles or CJ Hicks. Probably CJ Hicks, but I think CJ Hicks, regardless, is going to play a lot this year if he's not a starter.
Well, you led me into the conversations we've had this week. We got to talk to quarterbacks and Chip Kelly. We got to talk to linebackers and James Laurinaitis. We got to talk to running backs and Carlos Lachlan. Of the group, we'll start with just the quarterback conversation and Chip Kelly. What for you stood out about the quarterbacks talking with us? I was very impressed with these guys. Just, we've seen them throw. We hadn't talked to the freshmen yet, so I thought that was enlightening, hearing kind of their situations. Will Howard and kind of his growth so far. But of that group of quarterbacks, and you can throw Chip Kelly in there, what stood out to you from quarterback day on, what was that, Tuesday?
Yeah, there was so much. Yeah, that was really cool, right? So we get like Chip Kelly and the quarterbacks like that. Okay, like either one would have been really, really cool. Like, oh, we're getting Chip Kelly after practice. That's fantastic. Oh, we're getting the quarterbacks. That's cool. Oh, we're getting both of them, like all of them. It was Chip Kelly and then all 5 scholarship quarterbacks. Like, it was fantastic. 2 things jumped out at me the most, and like we could talk about 30 things that jumped out at us, Patrick. But I'll say the first was Will Howard talking about how when he came to Ohio State this past winter, when he got here in January or February, I believe it was late January, he weighed in at 249 pounds. And Mick's giving him like, the side eye, like, what, 249? He was listed at 242 at Kansas State. I did notice in the spring he was listed at 237 here at Ohio State. I'm like, okay, maybe he's dropped like 5 pounds. Little did I know he was up to 249. And Will said he's dropped all the way down to at least 234. Maybe as low as 230, maybe as high as 235. But he says he's lost 15 pounds, since. I didn't know he lost that much. So I think, okay. And, he's a good runner. But I'm thinking he's a good runner. He's not a blazer. And he's not a blazer. He's not going to be a blazer. But they have 5 quarterbacks who are reasonably fast. All 5 of them run over 20 miles per hour. It's interesting they now measure it by miles per hour. It used to always be, by 40. Oh, he runs a 4.5. He runs a 4.6, whatever it might be. Now it's like, oh, yeah, Will Howard is our fastest quarterback. Chip Kelly said he runs 22.1 miles per hour. I was like, what? Like, Lincoln Kienholz is right there. It'd be like one of those Olympic sprinting events we've seen almost. Like Lincoln Kienholz, 21.9 miles per hour. So again, Will Howard, 22.1 miles per hour, is the fastest of the 5 quarterbacks. I did not expect that. And again, it would be a photo finish. All of them are over 20 miles per hour. But Will Howard being 22.1 miles per hour, Patrick, him dropping 15 pounds, him getting stronger despite losing that weight. And yeah, we all know those things are related. Him losing the weight and him being the fastest quarterback, those are related. But I didn't know he lost 15 pounds, and I would have lost a lot of money if we bet who's the fastest of the 5. I would not have said Will Howard.
Yeah, I probably would not have gone that direction either, though his height and his long legs, he's not Terrell Pryor when he runs, but he moves quicker than he looks, for sure. We saw him bust out a 60, 70-yard run over the weekend. Probably wouldn't have been that long if he could have gotten hit, but you could tell he can move. He can certainly move. And you go back and look at some of his highlights from Kansas State. He talked about his first start against TCU. He ran, I think he said it was an 80-yard run. He had some really good runs in the conference championship game a couple of years ago, also against TCU. I think he had a good play against Texas as well, using his legs. So, that's going to be a big part of this offense, regardless of the quarterback. But it's good to see Will Howard, willing and able to do that. As we moved on to the running backs, there were 2 things that stood out to me. One, the willingness of these guys, and this carries over from when we talked to them in spring, but the willingness to just, we don't care who carries the ball the most. They seem very, and I think this started when Quinshon and Travion agreed to, let's come together and do the best thing for the Buckeyes. I think it's carried over into the way Carlos Lachlan preaches to his players about, celebrating each other's success and things like that. But, you could have 2 stars like Quinshon and Travion who just want the rock, right? They want to show what they can do for the NFL, but they recognize the betterment of the team, probably the betterment of, their health by not carrying the ball so much. So that stood out to me. And then just James Peoples in general. If you have not watched the interview with James Peoples, go do it. He is a fantastic kid, really bright, really well-spoken, gave some really good answers. Also, he's pretty good on the football field from what we've seen. I'm excited to see what he has to offer this year and beyond. Dave, anything else from the running backs that stood out to you or Coach Locke?
You nailed it. I mean, it's pretty amazing that 1-2 punch. I know everybody knows about it. Like everybody's calling it the best 1-2 punch in college football with Travion and Quinshawn, and it is pretty amazing that they're both here. That Quinshawn came here knowing Travion could stay, and then Travion stayed knowing Quinshawn came here. It's like, really? Like, and they get along, and like you said, they know like it's actually good for their pro careers. Like they play well this year, an NFL team, and they test well. An NFL team's not going to care if they have 1,600 rushing yards or 1,200 rushing yards. In fact, an NFL team might prefer 1,200 if it means you have less carries and you test really well and all that, and your average yards per carry are, where they should be. So those guys get it. And usually you would think those, if you're the two running backs going forward, that you might hate each other. Yeah, maybe you get along kind of, but these guys seem like they're legit friends. And then I agree with you, man. James Peoples as the number 3 back, that's a luxury. I know he's a true freshman. And it was cool getting to talk to him and some Sam Williams-Dixon. But yeah, there does seem something special about James Peoples as a person. Like he just seems like he's like very, mature beyond his years. And I think he reminds me of Boom Herron, but with a higher ceiling. And Boom was a really good running back here and played in the NFL for several years. So that's high praise, saying I think he can be a better Boom Herron. And Boom redshirted his first year. But James ain't redshirting. James is going to be that number 3 tailback from the get, and that's a pretty. Even though they don't have a lot of depth, they only have 4 scholarship tailbacks. To have those 2 guys at the top, with Travion and Quinshawn in whatever order, to have James Peoples as your number 3, that's a nice luxury.
And last thing I'm going to ask you, since we already touched on the linebackers and covered kind of what James Laurinaitis already said, Ryan Day today, we spoke to him after practice. Anything that stood out that maybe we haven't talked about from practice or anything else we've said here?
I would like to get a good feel for special teams. Who's going to be the kickoff returner? Who's going to be the main punt returner? We've seen guys return punts. We've seen guys back there. Brandon Ennis, Carnell Tate, Jaden Ballard, Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka. Who's going to be the kickoff returner? How is the punting competition going? Not to get too boring on you, but who's it going to be? Is it going to be Nick McLarty, the big 6'7" kid from Australia? Is it going to be the young man that transferred from Buffalo, Anthony Vineri? Is it going to be Joe McGuire, another Aussie who was here last year, still here as a walk-on? It's one of those 3. So how was Jaden Fielding going to be? Last year was his first year as a full-time place kicker, was the kickoff specialist the previous year. Now as a junior, can he be a weapon for the Buckeyes as a field goal kicker? So I'm curious about some special teams, man. I need to see the first. They need to at least be dangerous. They don't have to have a touchdown to, for them to make their season on special teams as far as a kick return or a punt return. But man, we've gone 10 years. This is Ohio State. They've got guys. They've got to find guys on kickoff return and punt return that can be dangerous, and there's no reason they can't do that.
All right, Dave, we're in a busy time of the year, so I'm going to let you go. I'm going to answer some questions we had in the chat here, but thanks for jumping on. I'm glad we did it this way. Got to talk a little bit longer than we probably would have if we'd just done the reaction. Though it's always fun to film at the Woody Hayes. I won't take that away.
It is. Yeah, with 20 other people doing the exact same thing. So this was actually kind of cool. All right, thanks for having me. Good seeing everybody.
All right, see you, Dave. All right, I saw some questions pop up in the chat. I will answer those as best I can before I pop off here. First, Nick Williams said, have heard all QBs are having troubles and are not consistent. Any truth to that? We talked about that a little bit here. I would say no one's been perfect. Absolutely not. But there's been positive things. Look, I think if you've never been out to a fall camp like this, a preseason like this, there are struggles. CJ Stroud, for instance, last season for the Houston Texans had his struggles in preseason. So these guys are going to have some struggles, and it's just natural. It's not going to be perfect. What I will say is I think we've seen signs of what can be from this group of guys, specifically Will Howard, who I think we all anticipate being the starting quarterback for the Buckeyes. And I think what's been interesting to see with Howard is how he's progressed. And for a guy that is as veteran as him, that's a little weird to say, but I've said it all offseason. When he got here, he was taking a step up in terms of the offense that he was playing in and kind of the way he was being asked to do things. It was a different offense than what he ran at Kansas State. It was, you're playing with guys like Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, Jeremiah Smith that are different than, his best receiver was a tight end last year, and a good tight end, one of the better tight ends in the country. But, when you're trying to get timing down with a guy like Emeka Egbuka, and you've never thrown to a receiver who moves the way he does, it's a little different. And he didn't have the benefit of coming in as a freshman, working his way through. Now, I have been asked by a few people, and not that Nick asked this, but I think it's worth bringing up. Are we seeing the same things we saw from Kyle McCord and Devin Brown last year? Because I know a lot of the same things have been said that, okay, well, they're good enough to get the job done, those type of things. Look, I think if Will Howard is I'm all over the place. If Will Howard is Kyle McCord level passing, but can also bring that experience of, playing in the Big 12 and winning a Big 12 championship, and also use his legs, I think you've got a really solid quarterback. That doesn't mean he's going to be a Heisman Trophy finalist like Dwayne Haskins, Justin Fields, CJ Stroud. That would be great if that's the case, but you've got the makeup there of a guy who can get the ball down the field, get the ball to his receivers, also understands when to take a risk, when not to, those type of things. And he has the legs, which Kyle McCord certainly did not have a year ago. So I think even if there is some similar inconsistencies with the passing, and I would say, based on what we saw last year, and we've certainly seen more of fall camp this year, I think they are further ahead than they were a year ago. But I understand why people have asked about, this sounds a lot like last year. Is it going to look like last year? No, I think there's more that you're going to get out of Will Howard. Will Starr, who's on here a lot, says tornado ripped through the neighborhood a few days ago. Power is still out across the city. Thank God I have a generator. Hope everything's going okay down there. You hate to hear that. Glad you are safe. Jermaine H. Runnels said, do you believe Day when he says Thurman has a high ceiling and has blocking improved to take from Scott? I think G. Scott's going to be the starting tight end for this team. Him and Will Kazmarek, I think, are going to be out there a lot. And I think it's up to Jelani Thurman to take snaps away from them. I think they need to get Jelani Thurman on the field this year. We've seen some really good things. We've seen some inconsistencies, though. Ryan Day talked about that today, that he needs to just be consistent, that the talent is there. So I believe that there is an opportunity for Jelani Thurman. Do I think he is the first tight end or even the second tight end on the field when the Buckeyes offense is out there this year? No, probably not. Could he work his way into that role if he is more consistent? Yes. I mean, he's another weapon. And if he can be a more reliable blocker, continue to make plays in the pass game, then there's definitely a reason to get him on the field. It's just a matter, like Ryan Day said today, it's a matter of consistency. And, when you're a tight end, it's going to be difficult to, do, especially as a young guy who didn't, do a lot of that in high school. He came in as basically a receiver, a big receiver from what he did in high school. Nick Williams again asked about special teams. Dave touched on that a little bit towards the end there, but if you want, on Twitter, I posted videos of both punters, Anthony Veneri and Nick McLarty punting today at the beginning of practice. I would say that Veneri is more consistent, having been a college punter for multiple years at Buffalo, whereas Nick McLarty, who comes from Aussie Rules football, has the bigger leg. There have been some punts at times that have gone straight out of bounds. There have also been booming punts that have gone 60, 70, 80 yards. So, what do you want? What do you need in a certain situation? It would not surprise me if Veneri starts the year as the punter just because he has that experience and McLarty comes along. But if you need, if you're pinned back in a big situation, at Oregon or Penn State or whatever game it may be, and you need to just get that ball out of there, you may bring in Nick McLarty. Now, you might risk a really, really awful punt as well, but hopefully he continues to improve. We haven't seen much from punt returners. They don't do a ton of that in practice. The field goal stuff happens separately as well. Special teams, other than a couple periods during practice, they are very much on their own to do a lot of things. Be that working off to the side. They're in the indoor facility at times when we're out there on the outdoor field. So, you don't see a ton of that when we're out at practice, but I would assume that the progression at field goal will continue to field goal kicker will continue to progress from a year ago. What I do think is interesting, I brought this up to some guys I was talking to at practice today. The plan originally was to divide up some of the coaching, because there is no special teams coordinator, divide up some of the coaching responsibilities between guys like Matt Guerreri and James Laurinaitis and some of the other guys on staff. But now the Buckeyes and every team in college football can use some of the analysts and graduate assistants. These guys can all be coaches and actually coach. So it seems like, just from watching parts of special teams, that they are using more of those guys to help work with the special teams, as opposed to pulling a James Laurinaitis away or a Matt Guerreri away. That's something at some point I would like to ask Ryan Day about. Today did not seem like the day. We had a lot of things to ask about. So we'll see what happens there. Troy V asked, how accurate are these miles per hour speeds? We were talking about that with the quarterbacks, because Chip Kelly talked about all of them running over 20 miles an hour. I think they're pretty accurate because they're wearing those, I don't know what they're called. They're basically like a vest underneath their equipment sometimes, or there's sometimes stuff in the pads, depending on how they do it. And, it tracks their movements, basically. It's similar to like if you have a smartwatch and you use it for jogging and keeping track of how far you're going and things like that. But I would imagine these, unless you are a major runner and you have one of the really nice ones, I imagine these are pretty accurate given kind of some of the numbers we see out there. So I would assume that Chip Kelly's numbers that he put out there are pretty spot on. Lisa Sims asks, is Will Howard a lot like JT Barrett was? I think there could be some comparison there. I think he's certainly bigger, height-wise than JT Barrett. He has a big frame. So, but I think you could see some of those JT Barrett plays at times, especially in short yardage situations, where you can just run Will Howard like Urban Meyer used to use JT Barrett. I don't think it will happen as much. You've got some talented running backs. I think Will get to the outside some on scrambles and things like that. But I do think that, there is some comparison there. Rick Montoya asks, rank our quarterbacks from 1 to 5. In terms of the way I think they are on the depth chart right now, I think that's fairly simple. I would say Will Howard, Devin Brown. I think they are kind of in their own, and Ryan Day talked about this. They started to pull away. They're in their own grouping with Will Howard. I would put above Devin Brown. I think Lincoln Kienholz and Julian Sayin are in that next group. And I think it kind of goes back and forth. If you ask me based on what we saw today, I would put Lincoln Kienholz a little bit ahead just because he took some more of the team reps. But, I think Julian Sayin certainly has a very high ceiling, maybe the best arm talent on the team, but just still a freshman, inconsistencies at times. And then Aaron Nolan, and I don't want this to sound like a slight to Aaron Nolan, but he looks like a freshman right now. We talked to him earlier this week. He talked about things starting to slow down, but I think he's still a kind of a step behind just because he hasn't gotten some of the work that some of these other guys. So we will see how that progresses, but that's how I would rank those guys at this point. Let's see if we have any more questions here. Doug Shepard said he heard someone say Kyle had a bad ankle injury that he played on last year. Could that have been the cause of his immobility? Yeah, he definitely did. He got hurt early in the season. It was, the Wisconsin game. I think there was some talk on the sideline. I think it was the Wisconsin game about, pulling him out, but Devin Brown was hurt at that point, as was Tristan Gebbia. So, unless you were going to put Lincoln Kienholz in there, which I don't think the Buckeyes were ready to do. Yes, I think that played a part, but Kyle isn't a runner, even less so than CJ Stroud. He can do it a little bit, but when CJ wants to run, I think he has the more athletic ability. He doesn't do it a lot, but he, can. I think Will Howard certainly will and can. And so, it played a part, but I think you'll see more from these quarterbacks, any quarterback that gets in the game this year, than you did with Kyle McCord. James Story says, how are DBs looking against Jeremiah Smith? If you missed it earlier, we talked about Davison Igbinosun and the battle with Jeremiah Smith in practice today. They're going to win some. They're going to lose some because Jeremiah Smith is that good. But these are really good cornerbacks as well. So I think it's a battle every time they go up there. And I think it's only going to make, both sides better. And, that's what you want. Rick Montoya asked, which QB has the strongest and most accurate arm? Strongest is tough to say just because we haven't seen them all air it out, no pun intended, on like next to each other. I think that Julian Sayin probably throws the best deep ball just in terms of what we've seen. I think that's something Will Howard, and Will Howard said this, is he's still working on to get better at. And some of that is just timing with these receivers. But, I joked with some other members of the media last week, I think, that, if you get in a 3rd and 35 for some reason against Oregon on a fourth quarter play and you've got to have it, would you bring in Julian Sayin to throw that deep ball just because it looks the best coming out of his hand? I don't think the Buckeyes would do that, but I do think he has shown, at least from what we've seen, that he can throw that pass and make things happen that way. It's still too early to probably want to throw him in a situation like that, but that's kind of the best way I can gauge that question. Most accurate, tough to say too. I think they've had days where some guys have looked more accurate than others. Sayin probably can be most accurate when he's on, but again, there's some inconsistencies there as a freshman, and he'll go through 4 or 5 plays where he looks really good, and then all of a sudden there's 3 or 4 where he makes some mistakes. So it's still early on in his career. Will Howard, I think, has been pretty accurate. He has also been willing to just put the ball out of bounds, throw it out the back of the end zone. Those things that you get, from a veteran quarterback. All right, we're going to wrap this up. I originally had a different plan for the Bucknuts Happy Hour. We'll probably move that to next week, but I don't want to say anything in case it doesn't work out. But this seemed like a good opportunity for Dave and I to get on here and talk about what has been a busy week, which continues on Friday when we have more media availability. So stay tuned to Bucknuts, whole 247 Sports Network. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thanks, Buckeye fans. I don't have a beverage here today other than my water, so we'll go out on a cheers, but a different cheers than normal.